Anne in California here from the Come Sew Lutterloh with Me blog. I'd like to show you how I draw my Lutterloh patterns using this vintage reprint pattern. It's number 156 from Supplement 308, year 2018. I have made a copy of my pattern because I do like to cut out the little pieces individually so I can leave them taped to my pattern. I'll be showing you a little trick I use today to narrow the shoulder in my patterns by using the high bust measurement in addition to the full bust and the hip measurement. Remember I mentioned that I like to use my high bust measure to avoid some gapping that I have from a narrow shoulder. I've highlighted those dots just to remind myself that I need to switch numbers in the scale after I've drawn these dots. I do find that my cardboard isn't quite firm enough to hold my pin, so I like to slide this cork coaster just under the pattern before I put the pin in. My high bust measured 93, so I do need to round up to 94. 94 on the scale is right here. I'll put the pin through and then right through that cross mark in the pattern. The cork holds my pin nice and sturdy, but I can still turn the scale. So I will start with the last dot that I have highlighted. It's a 7, so I'm going to hold my scale firm here. Smooth it out. The 7 is actually inside the scale still, but I did notice that the number 50 is right around the same level as the 7, and I need to mark it on the same side as the numbers for the scale. So I'm going to mark for the 7 there. Keep moving around. This next dot is actually the number for it is way up here. So I will line that one up and keep going all the way around until I have marked all the dots. Hold it firm, smooth it out. Almost done. Then once I get done marking all these with my high bust measure, I will need to take the pin out and change it to my full bust measure. I'm going to change colors here just because that will tell me which dots I did mark with my high bust measure. My full bust measured at 101, so again I need to round up to 102. Put the pin back in exactly the same place. And I will be marking all the dots at the waist and above, except for the ones I've already marked. I have a 20 here. Always marking on the same side as the numbers on the scale. I have another 7, so I'll just line that up with the 50. Move around to the other side because I've already marked all these dots. 9.5. And one more. 2 more actually. This one is for the bottom of the armhole. And then one more for the waist dot on the other side. Now that I have all the dots marked from the waist and above, I would need to pull the pin out and change it to the number for my hip. In my case, it is actually the same number as my bust. So I will put it in the 102 again, right through that cross mark. And then I can start marking the dots that are below the waist. My first one would be at 39.5. The next at 82. Another at 82. And then just one more on the other side. Now the order in which you connect these dots is not that critical. What is important is that you do your best to connect 3 dots in a row so you get a nice smooth transition from one curve to the next. In the small pattern, this may have looked like a straight line, but if you try to connect these in a straight line, they just do not work. This slight curve is closer. We'll connect these 3 dots, turn it over, connect the next 3. This top part can be a straight line. That's actually going to connect to the gathers in the front. The armhole, it is absolutely important to get 3 lines to connect. There we go. And then if I can't get all 3 of these to connect, I will just get as close as I can to get a smooth curve. You can always erase it and go back over if you need to smooth it out a little bit. Turn it over to get the other curve. When I try to connect these 3, you'll see the curve that I used for these 3 dots now is much deeper. So I will connect these 3 and just erase this line because now we have a nice smooth curve. The center back has a zipper in it, so it's not cut on the fold. So I will use the straightest part of this hip curve to get a very slightly curving line. You'll see I can't connect 3 dots in this case because the next dot is past the hip. It'd be a very long curve. So I have one curve here and then another slight curve outward on the other side. So that's all my dots connected for the top portion from the waist up. I will need to move my paper to get the rest of the dots in the frame of the camera. I'm not going to be able to connect all 3 of these dots all the way down. So I will use again the straightest part of the hip curve. This time going toward the outside. My next line will be a straight line. If you don't have a ruler long enough, sometimes this ruler isn't long enough to make the straight lines that you need. If it's not, perhaps you're drawing a long skirt, a bathrobe, you can always just use a yardstick. Any straight edge will do. Straight to the bottom. While I have this out, I will get this other long straight line, the rest of the skirt, and then the hem. Again, there are not 3 dots to connect. The hem is just a straight hem from one dot to the next. The last line I've got here is the hip curve. You will find that after drawing many patterns, that you will end up using the same numbers on the hip curve. Your hip shape doesn't change from one pattern to the next. I find that if I start my hip curve at the waist using this 5 and then connect it down to the next line, that usually mimics around the shape of my hip curve. So I'll lay the 5 up on the waist dot and draw just a nice curve to connect it to that straight line that finishes the skirt. I will probably go back and smooth out this curve right here because I've got a pretty straight line going into the waist and then the hip curve starts. So I will erase this and put in just a little bit more gentle curve in here. I have all my dots connected, but I do still need to transfer all these symbols from my tiny pattern onto the pattern I've drawn. I will mark the waistline, the grain line. I need to make a lengthened line straight through this cross mark, and I will draw in a suggestion for the waist shaping dart. The first one I would want to draw would be my waist, just a dotted line. The other thing I wanted to point out is that I have 2 layers of paper here. They don't have to extend all the way down. It's not 2 full layers. I folded it at the top and extended it at least past the waist. That's because I will use these waist dots as a reference for drawing the bottom line for my facing on the second layer. So I do want to darken these dots. Just hold the pen there a little longer and let the ink leak through to the second side. So after I cut this out, I can use these waist dots, draw a line again, and use that for the reference point. Once I've marked my little 3 centimeters suggested here, I can line up the ruler on my waist and draw a nice line parallel to the waist. That way I know I have a straight line for the bottom of the facing. The next line I would want to draw would be the grain line. Our center back is not a straight line, so we can't use that as a reference for the grain line. However, we know the grain line runs perpendicular to the waist, so I will line up a line on the waist and draw a nice long perpendicular line to mark my grain line. The next line I would want to draw would be a lengthen line. I know I have to lengthen my patterns, so I will make sure I have a line again that runs parallel to the waist and runs through that cross mark, whether it be a cross or a plus. It's still the line that you will use for lengthen or shorten. If you need to shorten your pattern, you would fold up the amount that you need to shorten up to this line. I need to lengthen the pattern, so I will cut it on this line, add some paper behind to make sure that the waist on this pattern matches the waist on my body. The very last mark that I will want to make is going to be this waist shaping dart. Now this is just so I can get the right length and find the center. It needs to be 32 centimeters, so I'll go all the way down to 0. I know from drawing patterns many times before that I prefer my waist dart to be around 2.5 to 3 centimeters. So I'll just line up my 1.5 centimeters on the line that I just drew. That runs right down the center of the dart. And I will make a mark at 0 and a mark at 3. Then that tells me that I will go from the top of the dart, which happens to be at the cross mark, and come to the widest part of my dart. Do the same thing down at the bottom. Just match this up to the bottom of the line that I ended at 32 centimeters. And I have the suggestion for my waist shaping dart. Now that I have all the little marks transferred to my pattern in the right places, I can cut out this pattern. I have my reference points here for the second layer underneath. So all I need to do for the facing is to measure down the suggested 3 centimeters, use my waistline to measure up to that 3 centimeters to get a nice straight parallel line all the way across to mark my facing. I will draw the rest of my pattern pieces using the same measurements, transferring the little symbols from the pattern. I did want to point out though, you'll see that the front facing is not drawn from the same pattern as the front pattern piece itself. That's because the front pattern piece has some gathering at the shoulder, and you wouldn't want that in the facing because it would just be too bulky in the front. So you will need to draw a separate facing for the front pattern piece, and you'll notice that the cross mark actually occurs outside of the pattern piece. That's fine. You will just still draw all the numbers with all the same measurements, just like you did before. Transfer the little symbols. You will end up with a pattern piece that ends up looking like this, with the tiny pattern occurring outside of the piece itself. So do make sure that you transfer all your little marks and symbols before you cut it out, because this won't be attached anymore once it's cut. Here are all my pattern pieces cut out. The only thing left to do is to cut open my front and back pattern pieces at the lengthened line and add enough paper to bring the pattern waistline down to where it meets the waistline on my body. I hope this has helped you understand the Lutterloh system a little better. If you need more help with the Lutterloh system, please visit the Come Sew Lutterloh with Me blog. There you'll find lots of tips and tricks, plus reviews of Lutterloh patterns. There's no membership required, and all the information is free. So until next time, happy sewing, everyone!